My first introduction to James was when I was a doctoral student at UCLA, and somewhat in the closet. This was maybe 1968. 1 foot out, 1 foot in, and a fellow graduate student said, "There are these experimental films that are going to be shown Friday and Saturday night, and I think you'd like them." And the person that created them, I think he's a gay man. I'm not sure, but I think he is. The words they used to describe him, telegraph, gay man. You know, back in the 60s, there were certain kinds of words that if the newspaper used them, there was a good chance that they were saying he's a faggot, but didn't say it out loud. There's a lot of man-centered imagery in these films. There's some nudity of largely men. I thought, oh, this is someplace I need to be. So I went to see these films, and I was blown away by them. It was what was called experimental films in those days. I think a better word to use would have been independent films. People made them on their own. Put a lot of love and creativity and time into them, expense into them. And I saw these films Friday night, and I went back a second time Saturday night because I wanted to see them again because the imagery in the films were so powerful to me. And to this day, there's some of those images that I carry with me, 40 years later. So it was, they were that kind of films to me. There's one image of somebody, a man, and the wind is blowing, and there's just a tree there, and somehow this white shroud is blowing, black and white, and I just stayed with me that way. And the person who was showing the films was a gay man by the name of Bill Moritz. I don't know if you know Bill, but he taught at Cal Arts and was a central person in the I guess what's now called visual music field. And Bill was showing the films. And so I met both Bill and James that evening. I was very shy at the time, so, I admired him from a distance, James, and I don't think he ever knew that I was there. What has stayed with me over the years around the films, in addition to the images, was what I thought James was trying to do. Today we make, with visual music, or some people make a big thing out of music and images working together. And I was thinking today, well, that's trying to keep 2 balls in the air. James tried to keep 3 balls, at least 3 balls in the air, with the music, with the images, and then with the poetry. With the words that were spoken. And so it's like visual music poetry or something like that he was trying to do. And I'd never been exposed to anything like that. And it just blew me away. This was the late 60s, so it wasn't the quiet, it wasn't like the late 50s. This is the late 60s, and it blew me away with the imagery and what James was trying to do. Thereafter, I kind of lost contact with his filmmaking because a revolution was taking place in this country, and particularly for gay people, and reconnected with James again through his poetry in probably the early 70s, mid-70s again. So the question, how'd you meet James? That was it, through one of his films. James has been basically the same way I experience him as the same person. An effervescent, running over the top of the cup, gay man, a little distracted, having the ability to listen deeply, someone you just wanted to hug. Of course, I never did it in those days, but that's how I experienced. And the last time I saw James, which was probably at a reading here, maybe early 80s, mid 80s, same way. Much more open though. I mean, much less guarded, as all of us are as we get older, and the Pope no longer runs our lives. Well, let me say why it's important to me, and then maybe the ripples will go out from there. As a gay man who came of age in the 60s, late 60s and 70s with gay liberation, One of the things I always felt an absence in my life was elders. There were older gay men that were involved with the movement. I was maybe 28 when I got started. And there were older men who were involved with the movement, but I never saw them as elders. Many times they might be 40 or 50 years old, 20 years older than me, and I saw them more as peers, boys who hadn't grown up yet. And James was important to me because he came across as my grandfather. He came across as somebody important. He came across as somebody worth listening to. And many times when he would come visit us at the Radical Fairy Sanctuary here in Los Angeles, I experienced or envisioned it as a visit of my grandfather. And because that was so missing in my life. Even though I had teachers and mentors and elders in my life, there was still this great longing for more and more and more. And James filled that for me. He was a gay man who was openly gay, at least in the periods that I knew him, who was creative, lived with that flame burning at all times within him, could listen more than many times give advice. The ceremony that he wrote about his Joe Singer and his marriage union ceremony was one of the first times that I saw somebody, particularly a gay person, actualizing the idea of bringing spirit and relationship and what I assumed was a sexual relationship together in one person. Very rarely in the early 70s did I ever see that. There was a lot of theorizing and talking about such things, but to actually see somebody implement something, create a sacred space where that union could occur, seems very important to me. He never lost his sense of humor. I've seen him in very tense situations, and there was always that sparkle in his eye. He was always ready to do another Betty Davis imitation, making everybody laugh. They usually happen at the Radical Fairy Sanctuary here in Los Angeles, when maybe Harry Hay would get into a discussion with somebody, and Harry had the would have been perfect for that Charlton Heston role of going up to the mountaintop and coming back with the 10 Commandments. And somebody had an 11th commandment, and Harry let them know that there were only 10 commandments. And at that moment, James could intercede with a quip, with a rolling of the eyeballs, with something that would just kind of let the tension out of the room, and we could get on with the merriment. I was both. I understood that, and you couldn't see his films, you couldn't read his poetry, you couldn't come in contact with him without knowing that. It was so clear that he had a depth psychological experience. This was not the cookie cutter experience that most people have. This was something that had some depth to it, as James had depth to it. I didn't experience James as a message primarily. I experienced him more as a presence. I experienced him more as somebody who was really living being gay in a new way, without preaching, without the missionary zeal, without the need to convert anybody. He did it basically through just being who he was. He was somebody, at least for me, that I could say, oh, this is somebody I want to be like when I grow up. Maybe if there's a message to that, it's probably authenticity, being real, sharing the fruits of your labor with other people, but you don't have to share all the labor with them. Well, he comes out of San Francisco, so that's not an easy theological question. San Francisco is a city where many roads meet. East, west, north, south, inner, outer, edge of the village, center of the village. So it depends where you're positioned in San Francisco, as in most towns. What was his spiritual path? I could see him easily as a Sufi, being in lineage with somebody like Rumi or Hafiz in the poetry that he was writing. I could see him as a village idiot, in the sense of the old shaman who lived at the edge of the village, doing his shamanic work with people, on people. I could see him very easily in that role. I don't see him as a Presbyterian. Vaguely, marginally. I never got into that where we discussed that relationship. But I was aware that he was part of that San Francisco cauldron of spiritual, intellectual, physical, sexual, alcoholic, drug-induced ecstasy. You know, there's something about the generation that James belonged to that I always admired as an adult looking at that generation and what they accomplished. And as someone who's been actively involved in gay community organizing since Stonewall, that there's something they carried that just couldn't be destroyed, even though they tried, that the homophobic society around just could not touch. And there's something around people like James Broughton, Malcolm Boyd, Harry Hay, Morris Kite here in Los Angeles, who I worked with closely, Merce Cunningham, John Cage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, where they were who they were. They didn't have to make a big deal out of it, but you knew very clearly that they were gay men, and they were people of substance. And I always appreciated that. I had an opportunity not too long ago to hear an interview that Merce Cunningham did with somebody, and they said, "But you're gay. How comes you haven't come out publicly? Everybody knows you're gay, but you never talk about it." And Merce said, "Well, I do talk about it. Somebody asked me, 'What's your life like with John?' And I told them, 'I cook the meals and John washes the dishes.'" And I just love that. The idea of Merce Cunningham cooking and John Cage with his hands in the sudsy dishwater washing the dishes. But there's something about that generation that just appeals to me a lot. And it's not assimilationist. I'm not talking about an assimilationist position. It's something where they're so secure in who they are, or secure enough in who they are, that they can move from that place of inner authority without having to bother too much about what the others are thinking. James kind of reminds me of as the brother of Alan Watts. They were separated at birth, but you can tell they come from the same parents. And you know, he was open, free, exploratory, supportive, few judgments, interested, physically in this world with spirit. Not like me, where I spent the first maybe 30 years of my life with 3 or 4 different parts of me in different rooms. All of him was together at one place in one room. I consider him a sexual liberationist. Not in the sense of let's go to the bathhouse and put on disco music, take drugs and fuck all night. Not in that sense. But more in a sense where spirit and sexual energy come together in a way that many times you'll encounter in Tantra or certain Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist or Indian Hindu practices, where there's an understanding that the throat chakra of inspiration and creativity is connected to the genital areas, the second chakra. There's a road between those two. And it involves generativity in the broadest sense of the word. And James seemed like he knew that. If he didn't know it, he certainly lived his life as if he knew it. James Broughton, Big Mama, Big Daddy, BigJoy.